All right, it's become apparent that this microphone really picks up well, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the volume of my voice a bit. And I've also moved the microphone a bit closer, so there could be an increase in that regard. So, some matters that I should address before continuing on are that, in fact, we have some things to clarify a bit pertaining to the question of reality as a whole. Reality as a whole, like I said, what reality is, just to say what it's perhaps even better to say what realities are. Realities are minds. As a totality, as one great family of mentality. It's all minds in one whole, participating in one unified whole. At the same time, there are distinctions between minds. Minds do have their own subjectivities. It doesn't make sense for everything just to be one mind. Then there wouldn't be a plurality of life. You have a family. Take, for instance, a family, a biological human family. Sure, they're one family, but they're each individual. Sure, they love and take care of and support each other, but they're still individuals with their own lives. There are variations on a continuum between dysfunctional and functional families, of course. But, here, I have said there is a super macroverse, microverse, which is really, a super macrocosmos and a microcosmos. I want to point out that there is a force of connectivity between the two. And there always is, because parts long to participate in the whole, in which is their proper context, their proper world. And there may be a finite or perhaps infinite number of these in a given world situation, which we should call really a realm. But as a whole in the world, this would be true, and in all worlds. And I take world actually to be broader than universe. Universe, interesting, another term that needs to be clarified. Universe is meant to imply a lot of things, different things to different people. If you want to look at the word, it suggests a unity within a plurality, or a plurality within a unity. It depends on how you emphasize it. Clearly, it is a functional term, but when it's used by people these days, it usually means the worlds of matter and the things which populate it, and all the forces of physics that go with that. But we're not talking about matter in that sense. We're talking about reality. As to what matter is a form of experience between minds and between subject and object. Matter is a language of experience. In this world, it is fundamentally corrupted in the way that it enables evil to flourish at the expense of other beings. Any beings that it flourishes by even other evil beings. But it most essentially, the consequence, the impact are for beings that have a genuine right to exist without such exploitation. And that would be beings not created by the evil mind. Of course, the evil mind has inserted itself in between it, into a dialogue here, and created ambivalence by its activity, and created a falsified version of the world in which particular emanations of divinity find themselves entrapped by confusing totality of wrongness, which they know could not be, which could not include their full essence, because they cannot express themselves truly and fully in such a world. And anytime they are somehow exploited under some kind of corrupt system of domination. That would be a veil that has been erected by the evil mind. In truth, to look at it more accurately as a picture, it would probably look like a sort of a zigzag shape that's out of phase. It gives the illusion of a wall at a distance, or if you don't have a full perception of its reality like we do looking at it from above. From within, it might look like a total wall, but it's permeable. But to go through it, one has to perform a kind of lightning bolt action. One has to break a barrier. One has to shift in directions which perhaps would seem unnatural in most circumstances. One has to go against the grain of it, but information is therefore blocked off. But it is distorted. It is in many ways severed, truncated, muffled, however you wish to say it. So, likewise, there is a veil, as shown, and it should probably be given a bidirectionality as well. And it goes between beings who are of the same essence in the world and for whom the world is ambivalent in its essence. So they are at odds with one another only artificially, because of the way the world makes it so. And they are at odds with their divine origin only superficially, insofar as the world makes it so, makes it seem so, and they believe it, or they go along with it for some reason. The body is designed to enable this kind of programming to take place with incredible efficiency by the conditioning process of the human animal when it is vulnerable and young. And that reveals that there is a systematic corruption involved. So in the cases of a supernal and fundamental kind of knowing, knowing that is most fundamental in nature, on par with a sense of reality itself, it might be considered a pure correspondence between consciousness and reality, the reality of the context of consciousness. And this, of course, would solidify in the form of some experience. There's at least some experience which I call epsilon, which enables a clear relationship and transduction of information and energy between a being and its world, a part and the whole. One level of reality in another, one level of meaning in another, and so forth. There's a clarity of essence, and epsilon works well to describe an essential feature in that way here. An essential feature of experience can be known. And it turns out really that this deserves its own specification in another form, which is that it is that there is a relation between the two such that There is a kind of knowledge of a special experience called truth that is very fundamental, such that X knows the truth in essence. And this is always in correspondence with, and is implied by, and implies that there is a special knowledge of a proposition that has fundamental truth to it. There's not such a thing as an essential or fundamental proposition that is arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. To not understand it requires an arbitrary denial, rejection, or alienation from it. But these kinds of propositions contain the property of a fundamental characteristic of reality, which corresponds to the quality of truth. And truth is a quality of the correspondence between components in a common world held in common by beings, so that their relationships are optimal. So this is not merely a discussion of how well someone can claim to know something, how truthful is a knowledge claim. It's a question of how proper is the world in which the being exists that's capable of truth claims, and how true would it be to say that that world were proper, and how proper would it be to say that such a claim is true. And all this will depend on an investigation, as I said at the earlier outset of the prior video, which I'm making this addendum to. And all that would be manifested by an understanding of the evidence that is both empirical and logical, which would demonstrate unequivocally that it is the case that you either live or do not live in a circumstance which is right for the sake of the realization of reality. In other words, reality does exist and does grow and does improve, not out of a deficit, but out of a fecundity of its own value. And it's not compensating for a lack. It's always growing upon its own resources. And in a realm where that's taking place, that if that's happening truly, then it's optimal. And if it's optimal, and then of course, and it's happening truly, then of course any processes of knowledge involved would be optimized and would also be happening, would also reflect the truthful correspondences and everything that's known. And so there is a fundamental kind of a proposition which can assess that. And there is a kind of fundamental truth which will enable the appraisal of that in the being, and the appraisal and assessing of reality, the axiological and epistemic dimensions of metaphysical ontology take priority to the human forms of exposition about it, which would be the specific science of metaphysical ontology. And that would be the more academic looking, the more rarefied and special world of thought for that. It's not necessary to understand that, to understand how to assess and appraise and assess the world using one's own fundamental mind mentality complex, according to one's best spiritual let's just say, prerogatives and purposes. So in the case of the qualification of all the material here, I think I've made somewhat clear what all this does refer to. And ultimately, these can all be demonstrated analytically. It's not necessary to now. These kinds of ambivalents are all manifestations of evil, but they also imply the relation of good to evil. And so, in other words, some have said that good and evil manifest each other. That's not true. They don't manifest each other at all. They annihilate one another where possible. Their ambivalence manifests between them because they're both present. And ambivalence is a manifestation of both at all times. Anytime there's ambivalence, there's both good and evil. And wherever there's not ambivalence, there's no good or evil. I mean, there's no good and evil, but it doesn't mean there's no good. So good requires evil for there to be ambivalence, but it doesn't require evil or ambivalence in order to exist. That's not true. And people who claim that, they're trying to make sense out of the fact of the existence of evil in perhaps the worst possible way that you can attempt to do so, by just going the opposite direction of the truth in some way. The qualities and characteristics, the qualia and the properties of subjective and objective mind, where there is some type of relation between consciousness and a real world, can be understood to reach a pure form. And a pure form in which this is reached, where truth is a key term, and certain types of propositions are very relevant to the expression of that truth and necessary in order to express it symbolically, is a specific domain that includes all languages, not just logic, not just symbolic logic, not just logical thinking, not just all languages, including matter itself. Matter and energy are a system of language here, and where mental realization occurs. Mental realization, relation of consciousness, and worlds of reality are all in the domain of the mind, and the real mind, which is understood to be the ultimate mind and the best and highest kind of mind, and the ultimate form of reality, and which dictates the best direction of its further realization. And that's all I wanted to say in this particular video, just to augment what was said before and clarify a few things. And I'm going to go further into matters that extend from this